So I'm Dr. Mike Grossman with Grossman Chiropractic. A lot of you know the various techniques I use, so I don't want to just keep hammering the same story every time. So today I'm actually going to be talking a little bit about injury, and then I'm going to spend the majority of the time talking about CARS. Not Ramon's CARS, but Controlled Articular Rotation. So it's just an acronym for a type of mobility thing that I'm going to go over with everyone here, okay? Now to first start, a lot of you have shown your family and everything like that, so I'm showing mine. So I'm not married, I don't have any kids, I don't have any pets. So this is my girlfriend Elise, so that's who I like to spend my time with. This was us at a boot camp class a few weeks ago, and then that was us at the Beyonce concert at Levi's this past Saturday. So that's my lovely girlfriend. And then now we can jump into actually discussing the topic here of the day. So I'm going to first start talking a little bit about injury. So as we all know, Jimmy Garoppolo went down with an ACL tear, and Niner season kind of went down the drain. So I want to kind of talk a little bit about his injury. I'm going to use this example as I kind of discuss some of the equations here. So if you guys have watched the play, he was running towards the out of bounds, and then at the last minute decided to cut to try and gain a couple more yards, and then if you watch closely, his knee buckles out, goes down, and then this defensive man hits him. So he actually injured himself. And then I'm going to kind of blame whoever his training staff is for not adding in some other elements that could have helped with some of his lateral movements or maybe even the loads he's putting into his body. So to break it down very simply, injury is just when the load exceeds the capacity of the tissues, then that tissue will yield, break, or buckle. Now, in his case, he was going so fast towards out of bounds and then rapidly tried to decelerate. So he planted his foot and then tried to cut across. So if you think of the amount of force he was generating by decelerating at such a high speed, well, his ACL and maybe some of the other ligaments in his knee were not trained to handle that load that he put in. And then also shifting in a different direction so rapidly will kind of put stresses in the tissues in different ways. And if you're not training those properly, that's how injury occurs. Now, you can't ever prevent injury entirely, but you can mitigate the severity of the damage through proper training, and some of the stuff that I'm going to discuss today would be very helpful, and I think it'd be helpful for him if the Niners kind of recruit someone who can work on some of the mobility stuff for him. Now, he just had surgery, so now he's going to enter the rehab phase, which is when we load tissues with less than or equal to the amount of the capacity those tissues can handle. So we can work on gradually adding more load or more force so those tissues can start getting more stronger and resilient and decrease the likelihood of injury. So what we want to really focus on here is injury mitigation, since prevention is not completely possible. So just being able to really strengthen and train consistently, especially for athletes, but even everyday people, even if you're not like a daily athlete, doing some kind of training just to keep your tissues really resilient is really important, so you can reduce the likelihood of injury or those common things like I went down to pick up my pencil I dropped and my low back went out. Well, if we had some proper mobility training, we could avoid those things a good portion of the time. So I'm going to first kind of talk about the definition of controlled articular rotations. So what it is, it's an active and passive rotational movements at the outer limits of the articulation of joints. So an articulation is basically having one bone, another bone articulating with each other. So making sure that you have good range of motion through your joints is really critical for everyday life, various movements you do. So it's really important to make sure that you maintain those things. A lot of times when we just kind of live our daily lives, for example, if you're working in IT, you're sitting at the computer all the time, you're always in the same position every time. So you've essentially mastered that position. But what happens when you go into other positions that you're normally not used to doing, i.e. reaching overhead trying to grab something out of the cabinet? Well, if you never go into this range of motion or just take your joints to the full ranges of motion they're capable of, the high likelihood of injury is really there because you don't explore those areas and your body is not really comfortable with letting you go to that area unless you actually do that on an active basis. So the language we speak to each other is typically English. The language that the body speaks is force. So if you really want to make changes to your body, the language is force, whether it's internal forces that you're applying yourself or external forces that somebody applies to you. So if you're not speaking to your body's biology using force, you're not going to see an improvement, and then you're actually going to start to see those higher likelihoods of injury or just not being able to move well. So CARS is great for rehabilitation, injury mitigation, and it's also really great for training. So if you don't have any sport specific, you just like working out, but you want to just keep good integrity of your joints, you can take CARS, which is kind of like a continuum. So you have very basic kind of CARS, and then you can work the way up to doing high-level training for CARS. It's a great way to prime your body for any physical activity you do. So every morning when I get up, I take at least 10 minutes out of my day and I do full body CARS, which includes neck, thoracic spine, shoulder blade, shoulder, elbows, wrists, hips, knees, ankles, and even the toes. So what I do that for is to just prepare myself for the physical labor that I do all day, which is working on bodies. I found that when I didn't do that in the beginning of my career, I noticed little aches and pains I'd get, whether it was low back, shoulder, wrist, and I was like, okay, why am I having these issues? And as I started to get a little more educated in the rehab world, I found, okay, this is a really, really great way to help train my joints and just get myself prepared for all the physical stuff that I'm going to do in a given day. One of the most important things about CARS and why I really stress doing every joint through your body is because it's always good to have joint independence before interdependence. So for example, if you have a bad wrist and you never really do anything to try and rehab that wrist, and you're like, my wrist is bad, I'm just gonna kind of compensate either through my elbow or through my shoulders. Well, then you're adding extra stresses to other joints because you're not focusing on rehabbing or using the joint that is not working too well, so to speak. So you really want to make sure that you're working each joint independently so that when you go to do big global movements, you can actually handle those type of movements and not adding added stress to the other joints that are healthy, so to speak. Now, an example that I'm going to use here is a baseball throw, kind of breaking that down. So with baseball throws, there's a lot of components that go on. Everything from bringing the arm back, which is external rotation of the shoulder, rotation of the spine, internal rotation of one hip, even a rotation at the knee and the ankle, and then you go into the throw, which you're starting to go into external rotation for the hip, rotation of the trunk, and then internal rotation of the arm. Even pronating and supinating of the elbow, and then even going through flexion extension of the wrist. Now imagine for pro athletes, guy has a really bad wrist, didn't do good rehab. Well, if he keeps throwing those high rate pitches, if he's gonna have a higher likelihood of the injury flaring up or even injuring other areas due to the compensation patterns through that throw. So baseball player is, you think more of like your kids or youth and making sure that they have good biomechanics and things like that. So that's just one example I wanted to throw out there to show why it's so important to address all the joints in the body and not simply just ignore an area of injury and say, that doesn't work well, I'm not going to use it anymore. So I'm going to kind of break down the steps on how to perform CARS, and then we're actually going to perform it as a group. And I'm only going to do the shoulder joint because I don't have time to do the whole body, and also trying to go around and correct everyone will take too much time as well. Okay? So for the first step with CARS is you're going to take a deep breath in, and then you're going to exhale to irradiate tension through your body. Now, you take a breath in, and what I mean by irradiate is basically causing like a muscle contraction throughout your body. The reason why you want to do that is actually something called Sherrington's law of irradiation, which is when you irradiate your tissues and you're going through a specific movement, you're recruiting more motor units from your body to actually make that movement become stronger and more focused. So for example, a handshake. If you go up to someone and you simply just squeeze your hand to shake their hand, they feel a certain amount of pressure. If you start to recruit muscles going up that arm, i.e. squeezing your hand, your forearm, even your chest, your shoulders, you're going to draw a lot more tension and a lot more force into that handshake, and the person will definitely know. So doing that while you're going through the full range of motion is going to help strengthen the area. It's going to help improve usable range of motion, because the difference between you just simply flopping your shoulder like this, when you see some people trying to loosen up before they're going to do a workout, there's no control. So you're just simply swinging your arm with momentum. Now, if you're actually doing it under control with tension, then you can start getting that brain-to-body connection and say, hey, we really want to address moving this joint through its full range of motion, under control, and we're going to really try to push through it so we can start to get stronger in that area. Now, when you're radiating tension through the body, going through the full range of motion, again, is really important just because, those everyday movements or everyday life where maybe you're reaching up for that cupboard or, playing with your kids or putting something together, just being able to go through those ranges relatively pain-free or trying to avoid possible injury. And again, we want to avoid compensation or coupling motion. So if I didn't have good range of motion in my wrist, I'm simply going to end up moving from my elbow or moving from my shoulder, which is going to add a lot of added stress. And then with step 3 here, once you've gone through one direction, you want to go back into that same direction so you can groove through that joint space. An analogy I like to use when I'm kind of referring to grooving through joint spaces is a jar of peanut butter. So let's say you're having a busy day and you were just quickly slapping together a sandwich and you get some peanut butter around the rim, put the lid back on, put it in the fridge. Wait a few days, you go to take that same jar out. It's a little tough to open because the peanut butter is kind of solidified in the grooves of the jar. Now, what do? You kind of go back and forth on it, loosen it up, and then hopefully clear it out. This is a great way to groove through your joint space if you haven't been moving a whole lot. So I'm going to kind of demo it first, and then I'm going to have everyone stand up, and then we'll kind of walk you through the process. Now, we're going to do the shoulder joint for today. So what I'm going to start by doing is taking that breath in. As I exhale, I'm going to contract through my body about 25%. So since we're all cooled down, we don't have that warm up, we don't want to go too aggressively because you can injure yourself or pull something. So we'll take it nice and light for this one. And then as you go through your training, you start warming up, you can increase the intensity of the irradiation that you're trying to accomplish in this movement. So as I take a breath in, exhale, I'm bringing that shoulder in a straight flexion. Once I hit that roadblock, we're going to turn that thumb all the way in. And as I bring the arm back, I'm going to continuously internally rotating at the shoulder so the back of my hand ends up next to my thigh. From this position, we want to rewind or groove through that joint space. I'm going to bring it into extension as far as I can, rotate the thumb all the way out, come up and over. So that's how you would move through the shoulder. Now, common compensation patterns for that, when I do this with my patients, is they come up to about here and they tend to lean back if they don't have good flexion at that shoulder. So you want to catch that to make sure you don't do that compensation. Once you hit this point, people will tend to rotate their entire trunk or lean away from the arm, thinking they're accomplishing the movement. So when you're doing those compensation patterns, again, you're not benefiting the joint that you're trying to focus on training or rehab. So I would like to have everyone stand up and pick whichever shoulder you feel like needs a little bit of motion, and then I'm going to guide you through this, okay? Now, I may have made it look easy. If you can't achieve a certain range of motion through this, do what your body allows you to do. Don't try and force into anything. Don't compensate or change your position. So you're going to start by taking that breath in, and then as we exhale, just kind of draw tension through your body, making a fist with the opposite hand, kind of clenching through the chest, even gripping the ground with your toes, tightening the abs, squeezing your butt, full body irradiation. Take your arm and go straight up, slow and controlled. Once you hit your roadblock, turn that thumb in as best you can. And then as we bring the arm back, don't let that trunk rotate, come back as far as you can while you continuously turn that thumb inward. So that way the back of your palm should end up next to your thigh. Okay, once you get there, we're going to just go into full extension with that hand in the same position. Then you're going to rotate that hand all the way out, and then you're going to come up and around, coming back down. Good. So I saw people could definitely use some work with some cars for their shoulders, but it's okay. It's the first time you're doing it, okay? So I like to break people down and then show you how we can build you back up, okay? So it's a practice that we can all engage in. Little rotation there, JR. It was good. No need to pick on you. All right, go ahead, you guys can have a seat. I just wanted to kind of get you an idea of how to do this motion, and then we can kind of focus specifically on how we can.
My right arm's like longer than my left.
So with cars here, most people will ask me like, oh, how many reps should I do? Just like you would with like weight training, for example. And I tell people, don't think of doing cars as repetitions. Think of doing it as doing it more under time. Because to make changes to soft tissue, it's load under time that gets you change. So if you just load it for a quick second and that's it, well, the change is going to be very minimal to the soft tissue because it doesn't react as quick as we would like it to, because we're in such a instant gratification society with all of our technologies and things like that. So one thing I want you to think about with soft tissue, it's viscoelastic. So there's visceral properties and elastic properties. So an example I use is maple syrup versus water. So if you have a glass of maple syrup and a glass of water, you pour that out, water comes out really quickly, and then when you try and do that with maple syrup, it comes out very slow. So when you're making changes to soft tissues, it is a slow process. So if you're gonna do cars, I want you to think of doing it more for like 1 minute to 2 minutes. You can always go longer. Shorter I wouldn't recommend, but you wanna do it to what your body's capacity is. Everyone is different, everyone has different injuries. So, making sure that you do it to what's comfortable for your level to avoid trying to injure yourself. So don't look at it as a comparison, even though I had everyone do it here, but just think of it as kind of focused for what you're capable of and then ultimately what you want to achieve.
Is this something, I know you said in the mornings you do it before you start your day.
Yeah.
For someone that's going to work out, is this something good to do before working out or
100%.
after?
You can do both, honestly,
Okay.
because when you do it beforehand, then
It
you got
loosens up
those
everything.
you got those areas kind of firing off. So when you engage in, you're a CrossFitter, so doing overhead presses is a big one.
That's
So
why
if
my
you don't have
shoulders
that
are so
good
bad.
shoulder mobility, you're going to compensate leaning back, and people tend to get like pinches in their low back or even in their mid back. So before, and I would even say after, because you've exhausted your body in different ways, and then also it helps to just kind of reiterate that training you're doing, because the consistency of doing it is really what makes the lasting changes versus like, I'll do it on Monday, oh, I'll do it next week on a Saturday. There's no consistency, then you're not really going to see any results. Just kind of like most things in life, right? Okay, so I'll go over some of the benefits here for why cars are so important. First one is for range of motion maintenance. So providing signals to tissue remodeling. Again, tissues, they react very slowly to the inputs we put. So if you do things more frequently, then you will start to remodel the tissues, whether you have scars, old injuries, a poor rehab from surgery, from like a torn rotator cuff, or even like a tear in your ligaments. So you can remodel those tissues with that consistent rehab. Another thing is preventing the creation of fibrotic tissue. So fibrosis or fibrotic tissue is basically scar tissue or adhesions. So when tissue should be functioning nice, so for example muscles, they should be gliding over each other really nicely. If you start to get fibrotic tissue from lack of movement, old injuries, surgery that you had, well, that tissue goes from this nice organized fashion to this disorganized kind of clutter. So when you go to utilize that same muscle, and you try and use it, well, the area where you have the scar tissue isn't going to function so well, so the other parts of that muscle will start to pick up the slack due to the lack of motion from that specific area. And then you lead to overuse injuries and other things like that. The other thing it does is engage mechanoreceptors. So like I had mentioned to you about going through that full range of motion, the more you move your body, i.e. force being the language of cells, you're going to start to get your body to respond better when you do your normal movements after you kind of utilize cars. So when you start getting more mechanoreceptors to an area, your body will say, okay, we can allow you to go a little bit further since you're continuously training this, and we know that you're capable of going in this range, and we're not like, okay, we don't want him to go any further. Because the body's very good at protecting itself, and inherently the body is very lazy. So we try to conserve energy as much as we can, which is why it's hard to break being lazy, because our body naturally wants to do less so we can conserve more energy. Now, movement is also a great anti-inflammatory. So if you do have an injury, for example, people sprain their ankles, their ankle can swell up like a softball. Well, you can still do cars, but you do it in the allowable range that's relatively pain-free. You want to do that as soon as you can for whatever injury you have, unless it's a full-blown tear or fracture. That's a different story. But you want to do that movement because it'll help pump out the inflammatory markers and allow new blood flow and new inflammatory markers to come into that area of injury. Now, a couple other things for the articular health and longevity. Again, if you don't use it, you're going to lose it. So if you're not moving your body through various ranges of motion or things like that, you're going to lose the ability to do that over time. And then, 20, 30 years from now, you try and go do something that's out of what you're capable of doing, that leads to injury. And then you also want to maintain and create new joint space and new joint health through motion. So you can increase range of motion and you can improve movement with consistency in practicing these things. And then the last thing here is a self-assessment. So the more you do this, the better you'll start to become in tune with your body, seeing, where does this hurt, how does this feel, because every day, things change, your body reacts a little differently. As you guys are sitting here right now, you're laying down new tissues when you're sitting here. So, this is a great way to see, okay, my shoulder doesn't seem to be feeling too great today as I do my cars. Let's go ahead and spend some more time in this area so we can improve how that joint functions. And then the last thing is, again, catching yourself. Are you compensating through this movement? Because if you are compensating, we want to correct those things as soon as possible so you don't keep building or training on dysfunctional movement patterns, which will ultimately lead to injury because you're not able to move the way you should be moving. Okay? And I think that's it. Yeah.
We actually have like 7 seconds left, which is great.
I love
But
it.
let's open up for like a couple questions.
Sure, yeah. Ramon, go ahead.
Can you teach us to do all of them?
Absolutely.
Like, can you, like, one
Yeah.
day maybe just kind of go practice?
Yeah.
We can definitely go through a flow of them. I actually have a YouTube video of so this CARS is a foundation for a technique called functional range conditioning that I use. There's a really good YouTube video I send out. There's an assistant instructor out of New York who he demos this. He has a female client that he runs through every joint in the body with. It's about a 25-minute video. I'm happy to email that out to you guys to like kind of watch at your leisure. But I'm also happy to kind of show you guys, or if we have a day where maybe it's open, we don't actually have a presenter, I'd be happy to run you guys through it for the whole body. And then you can start to see, okay, when you do have pain trying to go through a full range of motion, again, you don't want to push through it. So that's one thing I want to address. So if I'm coming up here and I have a shoulder pinching pain in the front, I go, oh, I can't. And I'm like, I'll just push through it, no pain, no gain. Don't think that way, because your body's telling you, hey, you can't do that because it's going to hurt. So what you do is you would come up, okay, pain is here, let me back out, and then let me go ahead and move from this range. Even if it was your shoulder was so bad you can only do something like this, that's better than doing nothing, okay? So I really stress that when people have injuries, they say, oh, I can't do something. Well, let's see what you can do, and if it's a very small limit, let's go ahead and just get you moving at that point, and then we build up from there.
If you could share that video, that would be awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll send it to the group email.
Send it to everybody.
Yeah, go ahead.
How's what you do kind of similar or different than a physical therapist?
You know,
Seems
it
like
is
kind of the same.
It is very similar.
Okay.
I like to tell people that I'm like a chiropractor, a physical therapist, and kind of massage therapist all rolled into one.
Okay.
So the biggest difference is I do a lot of the exercises, but if someone needs, I don't mean this in a mean way, but like someone kind of needs their handheld to do all their exercises because maybe they're not accountable about doing it on their own. That's where I say a PT can spend more time. Like, let me go through the 10 exercises that I gave you over the past 5 weeks, and I'm going to sit here and watch you do every single one of them. Because that's what a lot of PTs will do, and they spend that really large amount of time with them. For me, I want to make sure I know that you're doing it well, and I want to try and hold you accountable because it's not just about coming in and seeing me. I don't want to see you guys all the time. Like some chiropractors are like, I need to see you every week. We're just going to rack and crack you. Just keep coming in. And I don't think that's a good model. I think it does a disservice, especially with what we know. So for me, I want to try and show it to you, make sure you're able to do it correctly when I send you out the door, and hopefully have you be more proactive. You know, I'll use various things like, do you brush your teeth every morning? And people are like, of course I brush my teeth every morning. It's like, so you take care of your teeth health, what about your body health? What are you doing? Oh, I work out, I do CrossFit 1 hour a day. It's like, so what do you do for the other 23? Sitting down, laying down, not moving, you know? So I try and get people to be more proactive in that sense. So I am kind of like a physical therapist, but doing some of the chiropractic stuff is what kind of sets me apart from just practicing physical therapy. Yeah.
How does the CARS fit into like Pilates and or yoga?
So it's not a replacement for any of those things, but what it will do is it'll help enhance the performances of the activities you like. So that's what's great about CARS is if you want to do yoga, Pilates, running, whatever you want to do sports-wise, it will help to improve your body control and improve those ranges of motion. So if you want to go do yoga, you won't have the risk of injuring your low back possibly, or pulling a muscle, because you've been training your body to take on those various positions that they ask you to do. So it actually enhances the activities you want to do. It doesn't replace it. If you wanted to do like CARS specific training and like I just want to train in CARS, some of what I told you, again, is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more I can get into, but due to time and things like that, I will slowly get into it with you guys individually if you want to know more about it, but it will enhance those activities versus replace them.